The author, rahimahullah, is going to go on to talk about the things that are prohibited, meaning the things that are haram to do in relation to Jummah, are things to do during Jummah which are not permissible. And so he mentions وَيَحْرُمُ السَّفَرُ عِنْدَ الزَّوَالِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ عَلَى مَنْ تَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ الْجُمْعَةُ. First thing that he mentions is that it is not permissible for a person to travel after the zawal. After the zawal, meaning after the time of Jummah, the time of Dhuhr has entered, then it is not permissible for a person to start his travel. And the reason for that is because once a person is present during the time of Jummah, then the obligation occurred while that person was a resident. So now they have no excuse to travel thereafter, because it's obligatory for them to attend the congregation, and then afterwards they can travel. So what it means is that a person cannot travel once the obligation of Jummah has set upon them. And that's why it says وَيَحْرُمُ السَّفَرُ عِنْدَ الزَّوَالِ, during the once the zawal has come in, min yawm al-jum'ati ala man tajibu alayhi al-jum'atu, and that is the prohibition is connected to the person man tajibu alayhi al-jum'a, whoever the Jummah is obligatory on. So for example, a person, technically speaking, could not purchase a ticket if he knew that Jummah started at 1 o'clock, or the time for Jummah came in at 1 o'clock, and he has to travel at 1:30 or 1:40, because he knows in this case that he cannot make the Jummah prayer, and thus he will have to travel. Thus a person would be getting a sin for doing so, for not fulfilling an obligatory act. يحرم عليه الكلام والنافلة والإمام يخطب سواء كان في الخطبة الأولى أو الثانية. Also, the next one that he mentions is that it is not prohibited for a person to speak, nor is it permissible for a person to make any type of voluntary prayer. Wal imamu yakhtub, the while here means while the imam is giving the khutbah. It is not permissible, and the reason why it's not permissible is because it is obligatory for us to listen to the imam when the khutbah is going. So you cannot chat to the person beside you. You cannot stand up and pray nafila. Although one should make a point here that the fact that he mentions a nafila, voluntary prayers, excludes al-qada, because making qada is obligatory, and as we mentioned before, al-qada can be prayed during any time. So what he's talking about here is praying the 2 rak'ahs for entering the masjid, or rak'atay as-sunnah. All of that is not permissible, because it would negate the obligatory act, which is to listen to the imam while the imam is speaking. So no type of action is to be done except listening to the imam. سواء كان في الخطبة الأولى أو الثانية, regardless of whether or not that is in the first khutbah or the second khutbah, it is not permissible. One of the things that the author doesn't mention also is that it is not permissible to step through the shoulders of people when entering during the khutbah between the people who are sitting. If a person enters the mosque, he should sit in the back. And so the ulama mentioned that that is also haram, to step between the people to get into the front row or a row ahead, because it negates or distracts the people from fulfilling the obligatory act, because you're going to disturb them as you walk through. Then he says وَيَجْلِسُ الرَّجُلُ وَلَا يُصَلِّ إِلَّا أَنْ يَكُونَ تَلَبَّسَ بِنَفْلٍ قَبْلَ دُخُولِ الْإِمَامِ. He says وَيَجْلِسُ الرَّجُلُ وَلَا يُصَلِّ إِلَّا أَنْ يَكُونَ تَلَبَّسَ بِنَفْلٍ قَبْلَ دُخُولِ الْإِمَامِ فَيُتِمَّ ذَلِكَ. Yani when you enter the prayer and the imam is giving the khutbah, he says يَجْلِسُ الرَّجُلُ, then the person should sit. He should not pray a nafila. وَلَا يُصَلِّ, and here it's the la is for prohibition, and he should not pray, meaning it's not permissible for him to pray, under the exception إِلَّا أَنْ يَكُونَ تَلَبَّسَ بِنَفْلٍ قَبْلَ دُخُولِ الْإِمَامِ, except in the case where the person walked inside the masjid to praise Tahiyyat al-Masjid, and after the first rak'ah, for example, the imam came in. So he started the prayer before the imam came in, and then while he was praying, the imam came in, then he should complete his prayer. That's why it says except the person illa an yakuna talabbasa, meaning he was already engaged binaflin in the nafila prayer qabla dukhul al-imam, before the presence of the imam. So the jawab is, the answer is فَيُتِمُّ ذَلِكَ. Then he should just complete that prayer and then remain seated. وَيَحْرُمُ الْبَيْعُ وَالشِّرَاءُ عِنْدَ الْأَذَانِ الثَّانِي. Yani, here he mentions that it is not permissible. Also, it is not permissible to buy nor sell during after the time of the adhan al-thani. And the adhan al-thani that he's referring to is the adhan when just before the khutbahs. So in some places where the Malikis are, and in a lot of places around the world, there's two adhans. Keep in mind that the first adhan that goes off is the one just to tell us that the time for Dhuhr or the time for Jummah has come in. But the adhan al-thani, the adhan that he is talking about here, is the adhan, make a note, is what the adhan is, the one before the actual Jummah starts. So once the adhan goes off and the Jummah has started, buying and selling is no longer permissible. It is sinful to buy and sell. And if a purchase or a buying and sell were to go on during that time or after that time, وَيُفْسَخُ in وَقَعَ. Yufsakhu means that the sale will be nullified and the products will be turned back to each person. And that's what he means by وَيُفْسَخُ in وَقَعَ. Then the author is going to go on to talk about a few things that are also prohibited, but they're only makruh. So the prohibition is for the dislike of it. He says, وَيُكْرَهُ تَرْكُ الْعَمَلِ يَوْمَ الْجُمْعَةِ. He said that it is disliked for a person to stop working on Yawm al-Jum'ah, but that is what he means here is that is under the condition that a person is leaving it because it's an honorable day. Because in that case, they become like the Jews who don't work on the Sabbath, and we are not like that. We are not ordered during Yawm al-Jum'ah not to work. So that's why they mentioned that if the person were to do it just for the sake of honoring the day, then that's where the dislike is. Although if a person was doing it for the sake of preparing for Jummah or resting, then that's a different story. But if they're doing it as a religious ritual or practice, then that is considered dislike because we don't have a Sabbath in our deen or anything like it. وَتَنَفُّلُ الْإِمَامِ قَبْلَ الْخُطْبَةِ. Yani, and for the imam to come inside the prayer hall and do his tanaful, this is considered to do a nafila prayer. It's disliked. The imam should be in a designated place, and once the adhan goes off, then he should walk inside the masjid. Before the adhan goes off, he should walk inside the masjid and sit on the mimbar. Once he sits directly on the mimbar, then the imam will stand up and do the adhan. So it is disliked for the imam to come in, and contrary to the sunnah, for the imam to come into the congregation and pray the nafila prayer and then go up to the minbar. وكذلك يكره للجالس أن يتنفل عند الأذان الأول. Also, he says that it is disliked for the imam it is disliked for the person to do a nafila prayer after the first adhan. What do we mean the first adhan? The first adhan, just to let the people know that the time for the Jum'ah prayer has began. As I mentioned to you, there's a first and there's a second adhan. So the adhan, not the adhan where the imam is actually where the muadhin is actually saying the adhan just before the khutbah starts, but the adhan that precedes that. It is disliked for us to stand up and do a nafila. And so in that case, when the adhan is called, in some schools they may stand up in prayer, but in the Maliki school it is considered disliked to stand up and pray, and that's what he means وَيُكْرَهُ لِلْجَالِسِ, for the person who's sitting. أَنْ يَتَنَفَّلَ عِنْدَ الْأَذَانِ الْأَوَّلِ. So for a person who's sitting, which is contrary to a person who walked in the masjid and the adhan went off, since he's already standing, then he can pray his tahiyatul masjid. But the person who's sitting shouldn't stand up for the sake of praying nafila after the first adhan. وَيُكْرَهُ حُضُورُ الشَّابَةِ لِلْجُمْعَةِ. And it is disliked for the shaba, for the female, to attend the Jummah. Now what the word shaba here means is any woman that would be desired to be married. Because the opposite of shaba doesn't necessarily mean a young girl, because it means the opposite of a woman to whom men would not be interested in marrying. For example, you have two terms, al-ujuz, al-mutajala, meaning those women who have reached the age to where men are no longer, wouldn't be generally not interested in marrying them, or women that age don't have an interest to get married. So when we're talking about a shaba, we're referring to any woman who in general customs would be sought out for marriage. It is disliked for them to it is disliked for them to attend the Jummah prayer because of the kasrat al-ziham, because of a lot of the mixing that goes on during these big congregations. For this reason, it is permissible for a woman to attend the 5 daily prayers because there's no mixing, and there's no heavy traffic for the 5 daily prayers. Now, it's disliked when there's no fear of fitna, when there's no possibility of fitna, meaning that she's just a girl but she's not generally attractive. Then in that case, or she's not wearing makeup, or she's dressing totally properly, meaning that she's wearing loose clothes and she's fully covered, then in that case, this is what he's talking about here. But in the case where there is fair fitna, either that she's beautiful, or either that she doesn't cover properly, or she's wearing perfume, or she's wearing makeup, or she's not wearing simple clothing, then in this case it's not permissible, meaning that yahrumu, would be haram for her to attend the Jummah prayer. Then he moves on, he says, وَكَذَلِكَ السَّفَرُ بَعْدَ الْفَجْرِ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ. And it is disliked to travel on a Friday before Jummah. So traveling generally on the day of Jummah is considered disliked. That's before the Jummah the time for the Jummah has to come in. We previously mentioned that it's haram for a person to travel after the time for Jummah has come in because the obligation has occurred. What he's talking about here is traveling before Jummah actual starts, during the day of Jummah after Fajr. So the reason why he stipulates after Fajr, because technically speaking, Thursday night is already Jummah in according to the Islamic calendar, because Friday would have already started. So that's why he mentions after Friday, because if a person were to travel, after Fajr, if a person were to travel before Fajr on the Friday, then that wouldn't necessitate a dislike. And that's the end of the section concerning some of the matters related to the issue of Jummah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.